My name's Daniel Cole. I mop floors for a living, but that's not all I do. He stood in the far corner of the vast corporate building, mop in hand, gray hoodie damp from the evening shift, and tired eyes that had seen more life than most. Few knew his story, fewer cared, and no one imagined that a janitor, a single dad with grease on his shoes and holes in his gloves, would be the one to save an entire company from falling apart. But that's exactly what happened, and it took just 30 seconds. Daniel had worked at Marwick Industries for 5 years. One of those towering tech companies with smart glass walls, neon conference rooms, and executives who didn't know the names of half their staff. Every night, Daniel would start his shift at 7 p.m. after tucking in his 8-year-old daughter, Ellie. She was his whole world, smart, stubborn, and full of questions about everything. He never complained, never asked for more, just showed up, did his job, and quietly slipped into the background. Until that Tuesday night, the office was mostly empty, aside from a few developers huddled around glowing monitors and one tired intern sleeping on his keyboard. Daniel was cleaning outside conference room 7A when he overheard raised voices. 4 months of work and it still crashes. A deep voice boomed. "Sir, we've run every diagnostic. It's a hardware-software sync issue. We're losing data mid-process. If we don't fix this by next week, the investors will walk. That's 100 million gone." Gone. Daniel kept his head down but paused. The words hit him, not because of the money, but because they sounded painfully familiar. He remembered the nights Ellie's medical files had vanished during hospital transfers. How one tiny glitch had delayed her treatment by weeks. He didn't understand corporate tech, but he did understand systems, flow, and bottlenecks, because he'd spent years fixing broken boilers, jammed pipes, and tangled control wires at his old factory job before the layoffs. And something the exec had said didn't sit right. The next night, Daniel came to work early, mop in hand, sure, but also carrying something else, an old notebook filled with diagrams, scribbles, and hand-drawn circuits from years ago. On his lunch breaks, he'd watch the engineers through the glass walls. He wasn't eavesdropping, just observing, noticing, and he'd noticed something odd. At 9:43 p.m., while scrubbing a stain from the hall carpet, he knocked gently on the open door of a conference room where 2 engineers were still struggling. "Excuse me, I think I know why your system keeps crashing." They turned, blinking at him like he was invisible. "I'm sorry," one said, confused. Daniel walked in slowly, pointing to the live schematic on their screen. "Right there. That data packet isn't sensing because the trigger's set to milliseconds, but the processor's reading it in microseconds. It's skipping. Try delaying the queue by 0.2 seconds before sensing." The engineers looked at each other, baffled. One of them hesitated, then typed it in. The screen froze, then blinked, then loaded. Perfectly. No crash. The silence in the room was deafening. "How did you know that?" one finally asked. Daniel smiled. "I used to work in automated process systems. Different field, same logic." The next morning, the CEO called an emergency meeting. Everyone expected bad news, layoffs, budget cuts. Instead, he walked in with Daniel. The CEO said, eyes scanning the room, "Just solved a problem our entire R&D division couldn't crack. A janitor, a father, a quiet observer who saw what all of us missed." Dead silence. Then, applause. Real. Loud earnest. By Friday, Daniel had a new badge, process integration specialist, a real desk, a team, a raise, health benefits for Ellie. But the real twist, he never asked for any of it. He didn't want credit, or fame, or even a new title. He just didn't want another kid's future delayed because of a system glitch. 1 week later, as he picked Ellie up from school, she asked, "Daddy, are you still the janitor?" He looked at her, smiled gently, and said, "I still clean up messes, just different kinds now." And as they walked down the sidewalk, hand in hand, neither of them noticed the black company car that pulled up across the street, with the CEO inside, watching, smiling quietly. Something told him Daniel's journey was just beginning. The badge on his chest now read, Daniel Cole, Process Integration Specialist. But titles don't change everything. Behind the shiny conference doors of Marwick Industries, not everyone was clapping. Some whispered behind his back, Some rolled their eyes when he entered, and one executive, Richard Lansing, VP of Innovation, didn't even try to hide his disdain. "He's a janitor," Richard said coldly in a meeting. "A fluke. Let's not pretend he's some genius." Daniel heard it. He didn't react. Instead, he kept learning, kept working, and when the system upgrade proposal hit a snag, he stepped up. But Richard had other plans. It was a Monday morning when Daniel got the calendar invite. Confidential, executive review presentation, 1100 a.m., boardroom A1, no explanation, no prep materials, just a slot and a name list. Every C-level executive was going to be there. Daniel stared at the screen. His palms went cold. His throat dried up. He hadn't stood in front of a room full of millionaires since, well, never. He didn't even own a suit. At 10:40 a.m., he called Ellie. "Hey, honey, Daddy's got a big meeting. You'll crush it," she whispered on the phone, still munching cereal. "You're my hero." Daniel entered the boardroom, 40 chairs, polished table, a wall-sized screen behind him. No mop, just a USB in his pocket and a heart pounding in his chest. Richard sat dead center, arms crossed, smirking. "We want to see if you really belong here," he said, pretending to smile. "No pressure." Someone else joked. Daniel plugged in the USB, took a deep breath, and spoke. Not like an engineer, not like a corporate executive, but like a father. He spoke about system trust, how machines fail the way people do, when they don't talk to each other. He showed side-by-side live examples. He drew parallels between coding gaps and real-life misunderstandings between nurses during Ellie's hospital stays. He made tech human. And when he finished, the room was dead silent, until the CEO, who had been watching quietly from the back, stood up and said, "That was the most grounded, insightful presentation I've seen in 10 years. But not everyone clapped. Richard leaned forward. "That's great, but let's see how he handles real pressure." Without warning, Richard called in a live investor Zoom. "Let's show Mr. Briggs how your new fix handles real-world demand." Daniel hesitated. He hadn't tested the system under investor-grade load. But Ellie's words echoed in his head. "You'll crush it." He clicked run. The server roared to life. Graphs spiked. Numbers rolled. Code danced. Then it froze. 1, 2, 3 seconds of silence. People held their breath. Daniel's hand moved fast. He toggled one process, rerouted a redundant thread, rebalanced the load, all in 15 seconds. The system stabilized. Flawless. The investor on Zoom blinked. Did he just fix that live? The CEO leaned into the mic. Yes, he did. And he's not an engineer. He's better. He's present. Daniel got home late that night. Ellie was asleep on the couch, still wearing her superhero cape. He knelt beside her, moved a strand of hair off her cheek. On the table beside her sat a crumpled drawing, stick figures holding hands under a big red sun. One was labeled, "My Dad. He fixes everything." Daniel smiled and for the first time in years, let a single tear fall. Not because he was overwhelmed, but because for the first time, he felt seen. And somewhere, in the dim light of a sleeping home, the janitor who fixed everything realized he was just getting started. 3 weeks had passed since the boardroom demo. Daniel Cole was no longer the janitor who fixed a bug. He was now part of the development team, with his own desk, laptop, and a tiny potted plant Ellie insisted he name Captain Green. But change comes with pressure. Daniel worked longer hours now, more meetings, bigger expectations. Everyone wanted his opinion, and some wanted him to fail. Still, every evening at 60:45, he'd rush home, throw his keys on the kitchen counter, and listen to Ellie tell stories about her day, how she beat a boy in chess or made a volcano out of vinegar and soda. But something had started to shift. Daniel was forgetting things, like her school project due next week, or the cupcakes she asked for on Friday. He was doing everything he dreamed of, but losing the rhythm of why he started in the first place. Then came the drawer. One night, Daniel returned to his old job site. Just for a minute, he missed the quiet, the mop, the smell of pine scented cleaner. As he stood in the back closet, now dusty and unused, he noticed something strange. An envelope taped inside the cabinet door. It had his name on it, Daniel Cole. In case they ever tell you the truth. His hands trembled. The handwriting was shaky, feminine, familiar. It was from Maria, his late wife. He peeled the tape, slowly opened the yellowing envelope, and began to read Tor. Daniel, if you're reading this, then something worked out. Because someone saw in you what I've always seen: quiet brilliance, resilience, heart. I left this here because I knew you'd come back someday. You always return to where you feel grounded. You sacrificed your dreams to take care of me. Then Ellie. Then everything else. But don't forget, your mind was meant to build, to solve, to lead. This world needs people like you, who see before they speak. Don't let this world turn you into a machine. Don't let titles or money change the way Ellie looks at you when you make her pancakes with a smile. That's the real success. That's your legacy. Love you forever, Maria. Daniel couldn't move. He stood in that dim storage room, holding a letter that cracked open a part of him he had sealed shut for years. And suddenly, everything made sense. The next morning, the decision, he walked into Marwick's main office with a fire in his eyes. Not rage, clarity. He met with the CEO. I'm not quitting, Daniel said. But I need one thing. Name it. Flex hours. 2 days a week remote, and I want to help mentor kids in underfunded schools. Build a community tech initiative through Marwick. The CEO blinked. That's unexpected. Daniel leaned in. I'm not just here to write code. I'm here to build something that outlives me. There was silence, then the CEO smiled. You're the only one in this building who actually remembers why we started this company. Later that week, a little classroom, Ellie sat in the front row of a small public school gym, watching her dad teach 10 kids how to build a basic computer. One kid raised his hand. Mr. Cole, how'd you learn all this? Daniel smiled. I cleaned floors. Then I listened. Then I practiced. Then I remembered who I was. And in the back of the room, pinned to the wall, was a drawing by Ellie. A superhero in a janitor uniform, cape flying, toolbelt full of circuit boards. The words above it, my dad doesn't wear a suit, but he's the smartest man in the room. 2 years had passed. Marwick Industries had grown, not just in profit but in purpose. Its culture had shifted. Employees now talked about values, not just deliverables. They hosted weekly mentorship sessions, community workshops, and school partnerships. At the center of it all was a man who still kept his first mop in the corner of his new office. Daniel Cole, now Director of Community Innovation. Not CEO, not CTO, but something bigger. He was the soul of the company. One Monday morning, Daniel arrived late. He looked pale, quiet. By noon, word spread. Ellie had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. Treatable, but expensive. The kind of treatment that insurance didn't fully cover. Daniel didn't ask for help. He just kept working, smiling, showing up for his team, even when his eyes were tired and his hands shook from stress. And that's when the company made a decision. They called an emergency meeting. Daniel was told to report to the main floor at 2:00 p.m. When he entered, the entire building, hundreds of employees, were standing silently in rows. Suits, janitors, interns, coders, all of them. At the front, the CEO stepped forward. Daniel, he said, you've given us more than solutions. You gave this company its humanity. Today, it's our turn. He stepped aside. A young HR manager rolled out a giant whiteboard. It ready Fudu 42 Valojmans for Ellie Cole's full treatment, fully crowdfunded in 36 hours. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. The room clapped. Then someone shouted, he taught us how to show up for people? Another voice called, no one here would be standing if Daniel hadn't stood for us first. And in that moment, in front of the company that once saw him as invisible, they all stood for him, for Ellie, for everything he had done without ever asking for anything back. Weeks later, Ellie sat in her hospital bed, hair tied in pigtails, eating orange Jell-O and sketching another superhero. This time her drawing had 2 characters. One was her dad, toolbelt, mop, lanyard. The other was her, wearing a lab coat, holding a clipboard, smiling wide. She looked up at Daniel. Daddy, when I grow up, I want to build things too. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, voice low, steady, you already are. And as the sun poured through the hospital window, lighting up the quiet room where hope lived, Daniel Cole, janitor, father, teacher, fixer, finally sat down, not because he was tired, but because he had built something that would never fall. As Daniel walked down the hospital corridor that evening, Ellie's drawing still folded in his hand. Something felt different. He wasn't thinking about numbers, systems, or titles. He was thinking about how a mop turned into a mission, how listening quietly created a voice loud enough to move an entire company, and how one small act of kindness had rippled into something no machine could ever measure. He looked back through the glass window, where Ellie sat sketching with crayons, her smile wide, her future bright. Then he looked forward and walked on, because some people fix broken machines, but others, they fix people. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that the quietest people often carry the loudest strength, subscribe now, because more stories like this are coming, stories that remind us who we truly are when no one's watching. And maybe that's when we're at our very best.